That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and today I am joined by Chris Freiman. He's a business professor at West Virginia University. And Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. I just to get this out of the way, I found Chris, or I came upon his, not so much your work, but I guess your online escapades on Twitter, on X, and you've been a really great follow. I think it started with the glorious feature of X where they have the For You, and your stuff just kept popping up For You, where it basically felt like I was following you, and I was like, oh, let me just make this official and follow you. But I've really enjoyed your stuff, your commentary, and I'm coming from, so I'll kind of explain where I'm coming from this morning. So if everyone can notice, I have a shirt on right now. It's the Empire State Building run-up. So by the time this airs, I will have taken part in running up the Empire State Building on October 9th of this month. And it's next week. And I am nowhere in the shape that I need to be in to get there. So I was at the gym and I was doing the I don't know if it's a stair climber or stair mill or whatever they call it. It's just stair after stair after stair, getting myself in a really good spot. And I felt great, coming into this this discussion. And then I had to go on X, and of course the other stuff that X sends me For You is just kind of the worst parts of humanity. So here you are, I'm striking this balance of Chris, whose stuff I like, and then also dealing with the terrible humanity side.
Well, thank you. I also appreciate the term escapades. I feel like that's a diplomatic word for what I do on Twitter. And actually, let me ask you, how long does it take to run up the Empire State Building? That's got to take a while.
Yeah, so I've heard that the average is a half hour. And I think most people who are doing it you're not really running, like they're just kind of walking up at a steady pace. But then there are people who do it, I guess, like professionally. They're kind of these, stair runners. And I think it's something like the world record, something probably around like 10 minutes. So my goal is to beat the record. Or to fall within the half hour and 10-minute range. And it's really tough because I no longer live in the city. So I don't really have, tall buildings, let alone skyscrapers to train at. And I wonder if that would just be weird too, if like I just kept showing up at a skyscraper, for September and October. And I was just like, hey man, you mind if I just go for a run?
You could start a new sensation, frankly. I think maybe with that workout plan, I think you could monetize that. I like the idea.
Nice. Yeah. And I happen to be doing this when I am not in the best shape of my life. Like it's a lottery system. And I've put in for a number of years, and this was the year that I got it. But like 11 years ago, when I was living in Los Angeles, I used to run the Hollywood Bowl, which is like a really great concert venue, and it's technically, I guess, like a public park, so you can go and you could run the steps. So it's like almost like 140 steps from the stage all the way to the top. And that was just I was in a lot better shape. I should have been running then. So, but yeah. So enough about me and my escapade. So one of the things that we talked about was you described yourself as a political philosopher, and what does that mean to you, and what should that mean to everybody else?
Yeah, so the short answer is it means I try to come up with answers to the question, what should governments do? That's the short version. And so answers to that question are going to be informed by what we know about things like economics and political science. But those things specialize in telling us what governments actually do, what we should expect them to do, how voters act, how politicians act, and so on. But there's still this should question. So we say, okay, given everything that we know about economics and politics, the way real world governments actually work, what should they do? And so that's the kind of question that I'm interested in. I mean, more specifically, I've got a bunch of more specific interests. So I'm very interested in things like the ethics of voting. One thing that always gets me in trouble, I mean, especially right around now, I tell people they're not obligated to vote, except maybe in special circumstances. People don't like to hear that, although I think it's true. I work on things like the moral importance of economic growth, immigration, free speech, those sorts of things. So I'm sort of all over the road when it comes to interest in political philosophy.
Mm-hmm. And from what I've seen, it seems to be coming from a more of like free market libertarian perspective.
That's right.
I appreciate that, because it's like, okay, I'm glad that, Chris is out there making the arguments that I wish I was able to make, and you're doing it in a much, much better way.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that's too flattering. I can make maybe a meme every now and then to get the argument across. But yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. I think of myself as a libertarian. I mean, there are issues where maybe I'm not sort of a standard libertarian, so I might be a little more friendly to government intervention than certain hardcore libertarians. So in principle, I'm okay with something like a universal basic income. So Milton Friedman said we could replace the entire welfare state with that, just sort of send people checks. I'm sort of sympathetic to that idea, stuff like taxing carbon. But by and large, I would say, 90% of the time, I'm coming down on the libertarian side of these debates.
Yeah. And so like a few things, you hit on a few things that I'd like to talk about. One, the fact that you're a professor, and, it's no secret that, universities are often, hotbeds of, leftist ideology and indoctrination, if you want to, go that way. What is it like, being you, in the belly of the beast, or, is like West Virginia University, is it diverse when it comes to, actually, teaching different things, perspectives? Well,
so it's interesting that you asked that. So I moved to West Virginia University last year. So I wrapped up my first year, and now I'm in my second year here. And so now I'm in the business school. And for the 13 years prior to moving to West Virginia, I was in a philosophy department. And there's definitely a different intellectual climate in business schools and also in West Virginia compared to a philosophy department. So as you might expect, business schools are more business friendly. Mm-hmm. And also just, the students here, I just noticed they have different political opinions. So I would say they're probably more conservative than the students that I'm used to. I think there's more of an issue in the humanities. So if you're in a philosophy department, and honestly, philosophy departments are actually comparatively good when it comes to intellectual diversity. So I think people sort of looked at me more as a weird anomaly, somebody who had strange views. And they're like, oh, you seem like a nice guy. Why would you be this heartless libertarian? It's like, well, I've got my reasons. But also, I think like outside of philosophy departments, when you're going into other sorts of humanities, there's a really big issue where you can, quite literally have a literature department, let's say, with zero Republicans. Mm-hmm. And you think, all right, even if you're not asking for a perfect split, and I don't think we need a perfect split. I think it is a problem that there's almost no political diversity in a lot of departments. And even where we do see political diversity, it's sort of like in an economics department, you might have 5-1 as opposed to 50-1. And you think, look, one of the major functions of a university is to expose students to different points of view. And if, we're not doing that in our faculty, I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I went to NYU as an undergrad, and the first time I ever heard libertarian, it was only in passing because a friend of mine who I was on a improv and sketch comedy team with, it came up one day, and he was I forget what even the question was. I don't know if we were talking about politics, and he said, "Oh, I'm a libertarian," and I think his favorite author at the time was Ayn Rand. And you can go into the weeds about Ayn Rand's issues with libertarians and being associated, but the two are often linked in that a lot of fans of Ayn Rand aren't necessarily objectivists; they happen to be libertarians. But I was thinking, like, man, I was like, that's I was what 21 probably when I first heard about libertarian, and then I didn't hear anything about it for a few years. And I was basically like an English major, so I'd heard about Marx for sure. I'd heard about all of that, but yeah, the whole idea of libertarians just wasn't there.
So don't quote me on this, but I want to say I've seen something that Communist Manifesto might be the most widely assigned text in colleges right now. Something, if it's not number one, it's in the top 5. And so I think there's sort of 2 issues here, 2 problems. So one is, it sort of sounds like your case where you just didn't hear about these ideas because they're not on the syllabus of any course that you're taking. I think that's a problem. But I think there's also a problem. So John Stuart Mill, he was sort of a classical liberal libertarian type. He was a big free speech guy. And he said, look, one, objection that you might have, or one reason why you might doubt that free speech is important, is you say, look, people can sort of defend points of view that they themselves don't really believe. So somebody might say, look, you don't actually have to have a libertarian on your faculty, as long as you have, the non-libertarian assigning libertarian texts, that's good enough. And so he didn't buy, he was talking about free speech in general, but I think this argument applies to colleges too. So you might say, well, what's the big deal about actually having political diversity among your faculty? Why not just, make sure that whatever faculty you do have are assigning libertarian texts? Like you said, that's not always happening. But even then, there's this issue, which is just, you're not as good defending opinions that you don't really believe. So this was Mill's response to this. He's like, look, I can try to come up with the best possible defense of a viewpoint, but if I don't really believe it, I'm not going to be as skilled at defending it as somebody who really does believe it. And so this is why it's not just enough that you have the, 1 week on Milton Friedman or whatever the case may be, taught by somebody who thinks it's a bunch of BS. And they don't have a problem with somebody teaching it, even though they think it's a bunch of BS. But I want students to have the class with the teacher who doesn't think it's a bunch of BS, because that's where you're going to get the best version of the view.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful too, obviously when you're able to steelman ideas, especially if you're of people you disagree with, having an honest understanding, or an actual understanding of what they're saying or what they're arguing, is completely necessary. Like with the, you joked about, people, who can't believe that, you're this, heartless bubble, blah, blah, blah. But oftentimes, that's what is linked with, libertarians, this idea that you're selfish, that you don't care about others and all that, which, it couldn't be any further from the truth. When you're trying to, when your whole goal is voluntary association, that is peace to the nth degree. The idea that, okay, well, I'm not going to try to hit you or beat you up or threaten you in order to make this relationship happen. It needs to be mutually beneficial. And it's become like sort of like a hack sort of response that I always hear. It's like, oh, you selfish libertarians, you don't care about people.
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, voluntary exchange is mutually beneficial. People do it because they both expect to benefit from the transaction. And so I mentioned sort of briefly at the start about my interest in the moral importance of economic growth. And so that's another thing too, is you say, look, you look at free markets, you look at unregulated markets, private property, they bring prosperity. And if you look at that, there aren't really libertarian countries, but there are capitalist countries out there, and there are socialist countries out there. And if you look at which countries do a better job of making sure that people have like their basic needs met, it's the capitalist countries. It's not the socialist countries. And so my view is, no, it's not about being selfish. It's not about being heartless. It's about figuring out solutions that actually work. How do we make people richer? How do we elevate them out of poverty? And the answer is, you want a dynamic capitalist economy that's growing. Maybe socialist economies or socialists have good intentions, but really we should just care about the results. And the results are that capitalism delivers the goods better than socialism does.
Yeah, I think at this point in the game of history, I do question the good intentions part. We're sort of beyond that of 100 years of it, but I see it so much in these degrowth movements, right? Which talk euphemisms, right? It's like, yeah, degrowth, like nobody wants to gain weight, Nobody wants to, take more than what they need and blah, blah, blah. But really what they're talking about is like, oh no, millions, if not billions of people can just go away. We could just be done with them.
It really is sort of, I think, a very pernicious intellectual movement right now, where this is something that people have been worrying about for hundreds of years, and it's never come to fruition. That we're going to have overpopulation, and this is going to be an ecological disaster, and we won't be able to feed everyone. But here again, capitalist countries are able to feed everyone. So it's not a population growth issue, it's an economic issue. So the issue is, do we have the right sorts of institutions to feed people? I think there's just lots and lots of problems with the degrowth arguments. So one is they think that you can't grow an economy and fight climate change at the same time, and that's just not true. So, I mentioned I'm okay with taxing carbon. I think, that's something that I'm fine with and could be worth implementing. But if you actually look at wealthy countries like the United States, we are growing and we're reducing our per capita emissions. And so this idea that, no, the way we're going to tackle climate change is by making sure that nobody has a refrigerator, by making sure that you have to wash your clothes by hand. It's just not true. And also, my thought is, how do we implement this? So who is going to voluntarily relinquish their washing machine so that they can start washing their clothes by hand? I'm not super interested in doing that. I don't think most people are. So how do you implement it? And then you're like, well, maybe the government has to start getting involved. And then you're like, all right, you can sort of see where this is going. And you just worry that there are not non-authoritarian ways of actually getting people to quote unquote degrow.
Yeah, I think you might have been the one who retweeted this thread, I think from an academic. I think it was like a PhD in some bullshit country. I think probably Canada. They're all bullshit countries except for the US. That's how I handle the world. But he had posted something about getting rid of the washing machines and getting back to hand washing clothing, and how communal it is. Everybody gets together down by the river and they have conversations and blah blah blah. And I'm reading this thread and I'm just thinking, oh, this is a communist, right? Or whether it's a capital C or a lowercase c, who wants to live on a commune who nobody would want to live with. Like he's sort of trying to jerry rig the system so he can have a social life, so he can get, I know how I can get people to want to talk to me. I'll make everybody wash their clothes with me in the river,
So this is a point that, a lot of libertarian academics have made, and I completely agree with it, which is just, look, no, if you want to live a socialist lifestyle, feel free. Nobody's stopping you. In a libertarian utopia, if you want to get a bunch of people together and wash clothes by hand, you can do it right now. Who's stopping you? So like, you could live a socialist lifestyle in a libertarian society. And so I think it's perfectly fair to say, well, if this is such a desirable thing for people to do, then first of all, you should sort of lead the way. Like, you got to throw out your washing machine. And also, like, it doesn't seem like you would have to compel people to do it if it's such a great thing. And so, here then we start to go back to this, well, if I just do it, it's not enough because everybody else is using their washing machine. So really what we need is everybody to get rid of their washing machine. And say, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, then you're starting to get the government involved. But I think so many of these socialist objections to libertarianism or to capitalism, where they say, oh, you're living this materialistic lifestyle or this technology dependent lifestyle, and it would be so much better to live in a commune where you're washing clothes by hand. Say, go for it. Like, doors open. Nobody's stopping you. And so, like, I try to be charitable. Like, I want to say, look, it's hard to undertake like a major lifestyle change. But really, if a capitalist lifestyle is so terrible, you don't need to wait for the socialist revolution to live a socialist life. It is within your reach to do so now.
Yeah. My friend Gene Epstein has done a number of debates with socialists on for the Soho Forum, and one of his go-tos, he said, he points out, I forget what the numbers are exactly, but like the poorest 10% in the United States has such a huge value when it comes to like market purchasing power. Like the bottom 10%, I mean, you're talking like billions of dollars there. And it's like, go create something that, if you're a socialist, go create something that will resonate with those people and get them involved. Get them involved. If you're really concerned about the downtrodden, sell them something, whether it's an actual good, a way of life, or sell them something, and they will buy it.
And sort of a related point, and I think maybe Epstein's talked about this too. So you say, look, there's a lot of socialist worries about, they don't like capitalist workplaces where you have a boss and you have to clock in and do what your boss says. You say, what would be much better is if we have these like democratically run worker cooperatives where everyone's a part owner and they vote on everything, et cetera, et cetera. Here again, I want to say, look, like one, it's not illegal to do that. You can certainly do that. And when you look at organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, they have tens of thousands of members. And if you look at donation, millions of dollars. And I want to say, look, you got a lot of people who are allegedly socialists, and you got a decent amount of resources to start building your own cooperatives if you really want to. But it just doesn't seem to happen. And so, like I said, I'm trying to be charitable, but my first thought is maybe you'll like advocating for socialism more than you actually like living as a socialist. Because if you really, it would be like a weird thing. I wrote like a blog post about this recently. Or it's like, if somebody says, it's great, pickleball. I don't know what pickleball, I think maybe I played it once. It's like a tennis.
I just found out about it because my wife joined a pickleball league with one of her girlfriends.
Does she like it? She must like it if she joined.
Yeah. She says she's terrible at it, but she'll get better.
Oh yeah. So okay, so good. So everybody's like, I love pickleball. Like, it's great exercise. It's great for socializing with friends. Blah blah blah. But like, she never played pickleball. You'd be like, you're hyping up pickleball a lot, but why aren't you actually doing it? Like, maybe it's you don't really think it's good, but the fact that she does it is like evidence. No, she really does like it. And so I kind of think there's something a little bit like that with socialists. We're like, no, this is so great. Your boss is so terrible. Your job is so terrible. Wouldn't it be great if we just had a little democracy in the workplace with no or where everybody's a boss? Look, you can do it if you want, but you're sort of not doing it. So you're sort of like the person who's telling me pickleball is this great thing, but you don't actually play pickleball or try to organize pickleball games. I don't know why I picked that as an example, because I don't really use it.
It's a fun thing to say. Pickleball.
It is a fun word. Although I'm like resentful because my son had like a basketball game that was canceled because like the West Virginia State pickleball tournament was
sons of bitches. The elite pickleball elite are just changing everything. I heard a really good argument about having conversations with socialists where they're impossible conversations to have in a way, because for one, changing a socialist mind, in general is just really tough. Or changing anybody's mind really is tough. But when they're coming at a topic like, say, for example, growth, and they view it as this moral, kind of like a moral hazard that they're dealing with, where the idea that if somebody has gained, it must be because they are subjugating somebody else, and it's unfair and it's cruel. And they view sort of what would be a normal interaction in the day to day, like, oh yeah, my boss asked me to turn something in today, and how dare he use his authority to tell me what I need to do. Whereas a normal person would be like, yeah, I'm working for this guy. I agreed to these hours, and yeah, some of the tasks suck, but this is part of the job. So it's really tough to have a conversation that separates kind of not even necessarily the moral or the objective reality. You're talking to somebody, no matter what, is going to feel like they're being put upon, that they're being put down.
So I think the zero-sum thinking point is really important here, where it's like, if one person gets ahead, that means another person fell behind. And I think this is sort of implicit in a lot of talking points. So like, Bernie Sanders will always trot out these things where it's like 90% of wealth is owned by 5%, whatever the case may be. And sort of what's being insinuated there as well, there's the pie, and they're taking the big slice, and that means there's less for everyone else. We say, no, you can get rich by like growing the pie, by giving people that they want, giving people like goods and services that they want at prices they can afford. And so they're getting rich, but they get rich by making people better off. So like the economy is not a zero-sum game. And yeah, on the point about like bosses, it's like, yeah, I mean, not everybody is going to like everything that their boss asks them to do all the time. But what's the alternative? So I find this is actually like a really instructive question to always ask when people are comparing capitalism and socialism, which is, are we comparing capitalism as it actually is with its imperfections, because everything's imperfect, and comparing it to an imaginary socialism where there are no problems, or are we comparing it to like actual real world socialism? So you say, okay, you don't like everything your capitalist boss asks you to do. Fair enough. You don't like your work hours and so on. What's the alternative? Well, I mean, in like the most extreme version of socialism, like the government is telling you when and where to work. That doesn't sound so great. And like the more moderate forms where it's like these sort of mini democracies where like everything's sort of voted on, or you're voting on your work conditions, that sort of thing. Like then you've got your coworkers bossing you around. And they might boss you around in ways that you don't really like. And so I find that a lot of socialist critiques of capitalism are just like problems that would exist in any workplace. Like somebody is going to ask you to do something that you don't want to do. And like, that's life. That's not like a commentary about capitalism. It's just like, that's kind of the reality of the situation. Like if you're trying to provide a product for someone, you have to sometimes do things that you don't want to like, or sometimes you have to do things you don't like. So another example that sort of suggests a similar conclusion is, suppose you don't even have a boss. Suppose you're running your own bakery, or just like an owner of a bakery that you run. If you open at 2 p.m., you're going to go out of business very quickly, because people want to buy, I don't know, pastries or whatever at 6 a.m. And so you're going to have to wake up early. That's not like a commentary about how terrible capitalism is. It's just, if you want to make a living baking goods, you have to get up very early to do so, because otherwise people aren't going to give you their money. And so here again, it's like, you don't have a boss in that case. You're your own boss. But if you want other people to give you their money, you kind of have to sort of give them what they want.
You're at you are at the mercy of your customers to a great degree, and it goes beyond that. I mean, there's always the the socialist doesn't want to work, it's et cetera. It's funny having workers of the world unite, and then you look at the people leading these marches, and it's like, I don't know if you guys actually work. You don't seem to work.
So there is something interesting. I mean, I don't have hard data on this, but it definitely seems like socialism is much more popular among I don't know, intellectuals, right, than like workers. I think this is a real. So I don't know. I don't know exactly why that is, but it does seem like sort of an interesting dichotomy there, where like working class people, they don't want Marxism.
They like they like shit. They like their stuff. They enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean that. So I mean that's the thing, is it's like, life in America is pretty darn good. Again, it's not perfect, but compared to the alternative, it's pretty close to the best that we've got.
Yeah, Zora Neal Hurston, the novelist and Black conservative from the early 20th century, she wrote a piece when communists were trying to make inroads into the Black community, Black American community, and I wish I had the exact line. It's really great how she wrote what she wrote, just basically saying like, it's not going to. Communism ain't going to work with the Black community in the United States because Black Americans like to look good. They like to dress well. They like to eat well. There's pride there of walking on the street in a nice suit and all that. And I thought it was a really it was a beautiful takedown of that, because a lot of the socialist stuff, it goes beyond just the boss to worker dynamic. It goes into things like housing should be a human right. Food is a human right. I shouldn't have to pay for housing. I shouldn't have to pay for food. And you've written quite a bit about housing, and socializing housing or collectivizing it is definitely one way to either not get housing or to get really shitty housing that nobody is going to be happy with.
Yes. So a couple of thoughts. So I think here again, I don't really have the data on it, but I think it's I don't know. So I think something that's really interesting about Americans is, like, generally speaking, we sort of celebrate market-made wealth. So if you look at, every now and then you'll see these polls. It's like the top 10 most admired people in America or something like that. And usually a fair amount of those people are extremely rich. So like in the past, it was like Bill Gates, maybe Elon Musk, those sorts of things. And, you often have people like, well, why? I don't understand. Like, why doesn't the working class always support higher taxes on the rich? And I think part of that is just this ethos that a lot of Americans have, which is, look, if you go out in the marketplace and you make something that people like and they want to buy, you've earned that money. And so it's not like, oh, I'm this purely transactional thing where it's like, well, if we raise taxes on the rich, this could mean more redistribution for me, and then that would make me better off. I think it's like, no, there is this view among many Americans, which is, look, if you have gone out into the marketplace and made your money honestly, that's your money. Mm-hmm. And so it's unfair to tax it. And so I think this is like a very capitalist sort of worldview that a lot of Americans have, which I think makes it difficult for socialism to gain a foothold. And then on the housing point, yeah, I mean, my view is, look, America has commodified food. So food is privately provided in supermarkets. It's very cheap. It's very high quality. We've commodified clothing. So clothing is high quality and it's cheap. And so what we want to do with housing is the same sort of thing, just make it very easy to build new housing. Of course, it's difficult to do that now because there are all these like government restrictions on when and where you can build and that sort of thing. But, just as with other necessities like food and clothing, I think the market can provide housing if we just let the market do it. Don't stand in its way.
Yeah. With the sorry, my brain just went down. What are we talking about? Shit. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm also like I've been getting these like little warnings on like my Wi-Fi. So my apologies if the Wi-Fi goes down.
Okay.
But anyone who's listening now, this is how I deal with a brain fart. Oh yeah, here's what the actual like sort of self-made people and getting their wealth in the in the market. Something that I realize is you could tell a lot about somebody by how they respond to a Porsche or somebody driving a Porsche. So like if you're I drive a Honda. If I'm in my Honda and I stop at a red light and next to me is a guy in a Porsche, I'm sure a lot of people have had that experience. For me, I'm like I look at it and I'm not really a car guy, and I'm probably going to be like, oh, that's a nice looking car, and I'm sure that guy is wealthy. Those are the obvious there, but I'm not going to be angry that guy's driving a Porsche and I'm driving a Honda. And one reason why is because I know two guys who own Porsches. They're both immigrants. One is a butcher and the other is a baker. Neither of them graduated college. I know one of them for sure didn't graduate high school. And they were probably each of them like in their late 50s, early 60s when they were able to buy their Porsche, and both Porsches were like secondhand. But a secondhand Porsche is still a Porsche. It's still a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And one of those guys is my dad. So my dad, and then another Argentine baker, his buddy, got a Porsche. And so when I see a Porsche, I without seeing the driver or anything, in my mind it's very much like, oh, that's a possibility in this country, and that that is you can call it a status symbol. Most people are trying to get status symbols earlier on in life. But it's also like that is some prime machinery and human design, and that's what that person is rocking. That's how they're deciding to navigate the world.
No, I'm with you. I drive a Ford. Like, I'm not much of a car guy, but yeah, like I can admire it as like a piece of technology. You can sort of marvel at it, as a symbol of human ingenuity. But also too, yeah. So I think, yeah. So what's interesting about that case is you say, you can afford a Porsche by being a baker, in America.
Right.
And so it's like that's kind of an extraordinary thing where you're like, of course, that's incredible. And you say, well, how did you do it? It's by providing a good or a service that people wanted to buy. And I think an important thing that people miss. So one thing I've written a bit about is so there's this line that you hear nowadays: billionaires shouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. Every billionaire is a policy failure. Not that everybody driving a Porsche is a billionaire, but the idea is that there's just something intrinsically objectionable about getting rich. And I think that's false. So let me give you an example. So I think Fidel Castro had like 2 Rolexes. He would always wear Rolexes. I don't know what car he drove. I'm sure it was probably a pretty nice car. And if I see Fidel Castro in a Porsche, I'm not happy. I see a baker in a Porsche, I'm happy. Why? Because the baker earned that Porsche by making other people better off in the marketplace, by selling them something that they wanted. Castro got rich not by making people better off, but by oppressing them, extracting stuff from them, and so on. And so I think it's just too, shallow, maybe for lack of a better word, to say rich equals bad. The question is, well, how did you get rich? Castro got rich, and that was bad because of the way he got rich. But if you get rich by making other people better off, that is a good thing, and that's something to be celebrated. And you shouldn't be resentful when the person who's made a lot of money helping other people gets to drive the Porsche around.
Right on. Yeah. Have you done any trips to like socialist countries like Cuba? Have you ever gone there? I've never gone.
I barely get out of my house. So I have not. But you said you did?
No, I haven't. So I've only, heard, friends who've gone. And yeah, Cuba's that one country where a lot of, lefties in America are happy for it to just be stuck in time and stuck in, no economic development. They're very happy that Cuba's there. I remember years ago, there was I don't know if there was a rumor that perhaps a Starbucks was going to try to do something, in Cuba. And so many people were, so many lefties in the United States were against, like, leave Cuba alone, don't touch Cuba, blah, blah. And it's like, and it's so funny how, hearing these people, talk about it when, that day I had the choice between, I don't know how many freaking Starbucks there were in the city. I can go there, or I can go to the, Joe's Coffee, or a mom and pop coffee shop, Dunkin' Donuts. I had all these choices, and I was thinking, like, you know what? I bet the Cubans would like this choice too. I bet they would enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, socialist regimes are much easier to admire from afar than when you're in them. And yeah, I mean, this is a simple-minded heuristic, but I think it's right. I mean, which country are people trying to get out of, and which country are people trying to get into? I think that tells you a lot. I think people fleeing Cuba are very happy to have a lot of trendy coffee shops available. Like that is far from the worst thing that you could have in a country.
Yeah, I some years back there was there was this guy. I think he was a chef. God, I'm forgetting what his name was, but he was on like Opie and Anthony a lot, and I don't know, maybe it was Carl. His name was. But he would talk about food, and he was Cuban, and he would talk about Cuban cuisine, and it's like, when you talk about Cuban cuisine, what you're going to be talking about is the Cuban cuisine in Little Havana, Miami. You're not going to be talking about Cuban cuisine in Havana. And he pointed out, it's like, when you think of, you have Cuba, it's an island, but yet it's not known for seafood. It's like, how insane is that? Like, what the Cuban sandwich what they're known for are these, kind of non-perishables. It's like, ham and the pickles and et cetera. And I'm sure there's a whole origin story for that. But it is pretty amazing to just look at the the contrast between Cubans in Miami versus Cubans in Cuba. And what I love is. The people who escaped and were able to get out of Cuba, the lefties often say, like, oh, well, they were the oppressors, and if you're a political prisoner in Cuba, it's because you're an oppressor and blah, blah, blah. But yet they don't afford that same distinction to, criminals in the United States. You know, it's like, well, if somebody's in prison in the United States, he must be an oppressor of some sort. You know.
Well, so earlier you mentioned, like, you know, at what point do we stop attributing good intentions? So, I mean, I think it's revealing that a lot of people who consider themselves socialists today will be like, well, you know, of course, you know this line, it's not real socialism. Cuba is not real socialism. Or they'll say, well, what I really want is not Cuba. And there's something refreshing about that, where they're like willing to move off that, where they're willing to move off Cuba and the Soviet Union, stuff like that. Like, what I want is Norway. You say, okay, Norway is better than Cuba, like for sure. But then we sort of, like in some way, I think that shows us actually how soundly socialism has been defeated. When you see enough people who consider themselves socialists will renounce Cuba. So you still have the holdouts.
Yeah.
And the holdouts were like, Cuba is real socialism. And like at that point, it becomes very hard again, I try to be charitable, very hard to be charitable with that kind of interlocutor who's like, no, Cuba's the real deal. Cuba's better. You know, Cuba's the model. I think it is hard. It is hard to have that view and not be blinded by a political ideology. You know, so there's something more, I don't know, serious about the claim that, well, what we want is Norway or Sweden, not Cuba. I say, okay, like, fine, that's a debate that I'm happy to have. But I also don't think we're talking about socialism anymore. We're talking about a capitalist economy that's got a lot of redistribution, high taxes, especially on the middle class. But I think this is like a bright spot for libertarians and pro-capitalist people. Is I think we have made enough intellectual progress where people are willing to move off Cuba to some extent and go for Norway. Sadly, not 100%. I see holdouts who still say, no, like Cuba's great, like it has great medical care, everybody's fed. I don't know what to say. And I mean, I don't know what to say.
I do find it funny, the ones who are like, no, we don't want Cuba. But you have to admit, Cuba's done really great jobs with infant mortality and mortality in general, and also literacy. The literacy thing is just it's such a dumb argument because, for one, I know people have gone into the numbers, and like the literacy rate under Batista was, you know, like, I don't know if it was like 80% or something like that. You know, whatever that growth was, your literacy rate, big deal. It doesn't really matter if your government is taking books away and saying you can't read these fucking, you know, these books, you know, or you can't write this, you know, or
Yeah, and you know, this isn't my area, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think some of the stuff on the infant mortality has to do with the way countries count infant mortality. So what counts as an instance of infant mortality? But yeah, here again, there definitely is this sort of group of holdouts who kind of can't resist defending Cuba and Venezuela. And I say, you know, I don't know, I'll give you points for, I don't know, ideological purity or something like that. Yeah. But it's 2024, and you know, we can have the Norway versus America debate. That's fine. But I think the Cuba Soviet Union versus America debate, that's over. I mean, I just can't see sort of a serious debate about the merits of those two anymore.
Yeah, and you know, when it comes to, you know, life expectancy, you know, I think the deaths, the way that those are calculated are also different too. And that, you know, the United States, we have a lot of cars, we have a lot of car accidents, we have a lot of deaths via car. We have, you know, unfortunately, we have a lot of gun deaths, and I'm sure those all get factored into the, you know, life expectancy. But even with that, you know, even if I, you know, give you like, oh, the life expectancy in Cuba is 80 years, and in the United States it's 77. Yeah, I will give up those last 3 years if I'm allowed to live in my country, where last month, or in August actually, I got to go to a friend's wedding in Santa Barbara. I will happily give up 3 years at the end of my life if it means that I get to go to paradises like Santa Barbara and enjoy everything that capitalism has afforded me.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is what I'm saying too. I mean, this is the choice that people who leave Cuba are making. They're happy to make that trade-off. And yeah, the life expectancy stuff I think is so that often gets brought up when people are sort of critiquing the US economic system. It is true that we have lower life expectancy, but as you pointed out, I mean that's a complicated consideration. So traffic accidents, I think drug overdoses in the United States, there's a lot more than just the economic system that goes into life expectancy. And the other sort of point to make there, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. But one is a ton of pharmaceutical innovation comes out of the United States. And so you do have, for example, European countries with high life expectancies, but they're using drugs that were either developed in the United States or basically make their profit in the United States. And so you say, oh, if you made America more like these sort of European social democracies, you would lose a lot of that pharmaceutical innovation, which would not just be bad for America, it would be bad for the world.
You know, on that, a question that I've wondered, because I've seen these, you know, charts before when they talk about drug prices in America versus Europe, and they are for drugs that were developed in America, and oftentimes the American price is much higher than the European one. Why is that? And you know, I understand when it comes to, you know, research and development, you need to make that money back. But I'm wondering, you know, why aren't the drug companies able to make that money out of the pockets of Europeans as opposed to, you know, Americans?
Yeah, so I mean, the short answer is price caps. Although the United States is sort of slowly moving in that direction, and you're hearing more and more calls for like caps on the price of Ozempic, for example. Like Bernie Sanders is talking a lot about that. But right, that I mean, that's basically the reason why is, you know, in order for these you know, drug companies to turn a profit, they got to make a lot of money on the drugs that actually hit. So that, like, there's the R&D for the drugs, there's the regulatory costs. Also, there's the R&D for the drugs that never hit, like that are never successful. So it's very, very expensive to develop successful drugs, and you want them to be able to recoup the costs. And so they tend to recoup the costs in America, where we don't have the same sort of price controls as the European countries. And so when people say, you know, it's unfair that the price of Ozempic is whatever in America compared to these other countries, I mean, there's a sense in which I agree that there's something unfair there. But what you don't want to do is close off pharmaceutical innovation by capping the prices and making it unprofitable to develop new drugs. You might just want a more equitable system of payment where, like, European countries are paying their fair share. How we do that, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think it's not an adequate analysis to say, hey, look, drug prices are higher in the United States than in Europe. Therefore, the United States should cap the price of drugs, because then you're sort of killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Like, you might get to 2024 drugs cheaper, but the question is, what does the world look like in 2044? Like, what drugs would have been developed that don't get developed because they can no longer make a profit doing it?
Yeah. Everything that I've heard about Ozempic, it's all been really positive from people who I know. I had lunch the other day with a guy who's on it, and he's struggled his whole life with weight gain. It's you know, his mother, his brothers, and all that. And his big thing is, he describes it that he's always picking. So he was, you know, his kids are eating, they don't finish. He's picking, he's eating. So he's eating, like, you know, throughout the day. He's not monitoring the calorie count. And now he's been on, you know, Ozempic for, I guess, a couple months. He's dropped like 24 pounds. And he said that he doesn't have that craving to eat anymore. And so I'm hoping that miracle drug is the miracle drug that it seems to be. Although it is very interesting to think, like, you know, what if that does work, you know, if it becomes so common, like, what do people look like 20 years from now? You know, it's like, you know, are there going to be a lot of thin people walking around with, you know, little fat souls, you know?
I mean, it does seem like, I don't know, it seems like celebrities are using it too, to get thin. And yeah, what's interesting too is not just the weight loss. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but I've heard, because it does seem to sort of reduce the sort of picking behavior. It's like it has some sort of beneficial effects, or they think it might have certain beneficial effects for like drug addiction, like people like can moderate compulsive behaviors. Yeah, so like I think it is. I mean, people that seem to be astonished at all the things it can do, and so the thing is, it was developed in Europe, but it makes something like 70% of its money in the United States. So it's not making its money back in Europe; it's making its money so we're paying for it essentially.
I'm imagining some European with an evil European accent saying everything's going according to plan. It's going according to plan.
Well, but no, we're the ones getting thin and off drugs. I mean, we're paying for it. We're paying for it, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's still a part of me that's like, oh, you fucking cheaters. Like here I am. I'm weighing my food and counting calories and trying to get back into exercise. God damn it, I'm running up the Empire State Building next week, and here you are, taking the easy way.
It is interesting. So like I'll teach, not so much anymore, but like I used to teach stuff in like medical ethics and like biomedical ethics, and like one thing is, to what extent would it be a good thing if we can just like start directly tinkering with people's genes? So like, I don't know. So like we make it harder for them to put on body fat or something like that. And like, there is this intuition where it's like, yeah, but that's kind of cheating. Like you're not working. Right. It's like, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. But then what happens is you end up finding out like, all of these gorgeous in shape people, technically they are cheating. So like, just look at movie stars when it comes time to for someone to be a superhero. And it's like, it's really funny, like watching those conversations online, especially with people who are, in the fitness industry, who, are on, different, hormonal treatments and stuff like that, where they're like, oh yeah, I know what you're taking. I know exactly I can tell what you're taking. And it's me, I'm 42. How old are you?
I am also 42.
42. Look at us.
Yeah. We don't look too bad. We're doing all right.
Right. I got too many silvers, but in my beard.
No, so look, I got a haircut. Let's see. You can sort of see I got that. Every time I get a haircut, there's more salt and less pepper.
There we go. Yeah. But we're 42, and I am totally ready for a decade from now, maybe even sooner, where it's like, what's going to make my living, better and me feel better? Oh yeah, I might have to go on like, testosterone treatment or anabolic steroids. Yeah, I'm fine. I don't mind being a cheater if it's going to make my life better down the road.
Well, and so what's interesting too is, what one generation's cheating is just the next generation's, I don't know, like just sort of nothing burger, where it's
standard routine.
Yeah, it's like, we brush our teeth with fluoride, and you're like, in some sense that's cheating, like it's cheating, but it's like, it's just everybody does it. Or like, braces and stuff like that. That's like, but we've learned to just sort of accommodate it, and it's just commonplace. And I think that's right. I mean, and it is good too, is like, we're not just expanding our lifespan, but like our health span as well. So it's like, I mean, you look at like pro athletes today. Like, I don't know if LeBron's on something. I mean, whatever he's doing, it's working. But you compare like the 38-year-old LeBron James to the 38-year-old Michael Jordan, and something's different between their routines, because I mean, he's playing like he's 22 years old, and I think, all right, maybe some of that'll trickle down to me as I get older, and I can use some of the pharmaceutical innovations.
I want to get on the LeBron stuff, whatever. Except for LeBron's hairline, I don't want that. I want to keep the hairline that I have.
It's unbelievable how, like, he's probably a billionaire. He like sleeps in a hyperbaric chamber, all this stuff, but like that just seems to be an intractable problem. Like, there's no science that can fix that hairline. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, because if it's there, he would take it. Yeah. So it's just maybe not possible. It's physically impossible.
If he could fix his hairline, he would put a championship ring on for just conquering his most formidable foe.
That's right. That tells me it is an undefeatable foe. So yeah.
So but before I let you go, there's a big hubbub happening on the docks with the longshoremen in the United States. So I don't know. Right now we're recording October 2nd. This will come out in a couple of weeks. So I don't know where we're going to be, but where are we now? And what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know what the latest development is, like the last 24 hours or so, but yeah, I mean, one of the major demands that the dock workers are making is a restriction on automation. And so they want higher wages, of course, but they also want to restrict the ability to automate ports. And so my take on this is, look, you have freedom of association. If you want to join a union and you want to go on strike, that's your business. But I think it's very bad to restrict technology that can make things cheaper in the name of saving jobs. So there's like this famous story from Milton Friedman. I don't know if it's true or not, but I forget where he is. He's like touring some country and he sees people digging a canal and they're using shovels. And he's like, why are they using shovels? Shouldn't they be using excavators? And the guy's like, no, you misunderstand. The point is not to get the canal finished. It's to make work for these people. And then he says, well, then they should be using spoons. And so he's like, there's a trade-off between doing things efficiently and making jobs for people. And I think what we want to do is do things efficiently. And so if you say, look, if by automating things, not just ports, but like all sorts of stuff, we make things cheaper because businesses are saving on labor costs, that's good for the American consumer because everything's cheaper. And you say, well, okay, well, what about the people who are put out of work? So there's this old economist, Bastiat, who talks about this, where he's basically like, look, if something is made cheaper, and you save money when you buy it, this means you have more money left over. And what do you do with that leftover money? You buy other stuff. And so you say, okay, now that I'm paying 10% less for everything because all this stuff has been automated, I have 10% left for coffee, whatever. And so then this creates a demand for coffee labor. So I take my new disposable income and go to Starbucks, and I've created jobs for baristas. And so the idea is like, yes, like there is this worry when people become unemployed because of technological advances. And like, that's a problem that's worth taking seriously. But what we want is like a dynamic economy that's constantly making things cheaper, that's making life better for everyone. And then we say, okay, like if this means that you're no longer able to work like on the docks, for example, all right, let's figure out a way to get you trained for a new job, for instance. But what we don't want to do is sort of like freeze our technology in time and say, all right, we are not making any technological advances now, and everybody gets to keep the job that they currently have. And one reason why that would just be an absurd position is try applying it to the past. So like, I don't know, I guess Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. I don't know anymore who invented what. But like, again, this is sort of a Bastiat kind of example where it's like you could have all these candle makers. They say, look, all these light bulbs are going to put us out of a job. And you say, what do? Do you ban the light bulb? Well, clearly not, because that's made everybody's life a lot better having the light bulb. But you say, okay, now we have cheap and abundant light. You no longer have to work as a candle maker. Maybe you work, on an automobile assembly line or something like that. But nobody would want the past to have frozen its technology in place because all of these advances have made life better off. And so we shouldn't freeze it right now. We should just, let the economy do its thing and try to get unemployed workers new jobs.
Yeah, I listening, to some of the arguments, I was like, okay, demanding higher wages, I get that. That's understandable. But demanding that no automation happen, stopping technological advancements in its tracks seemed so bonkers to me because basically, like, even if you make that, like, say you were to make that deal, right? Well, there's an endpoint on that, right? You're not going to make no technological advancement, no automation for the next 1,000 years. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a bunch of, advancements and, robot technology just waiting. And then they're going to, come in and then, who knows, maybe, you go from longshoremen being, what are they, like 50,000, total, like in the country, maybe that gets down to 5,000 just from that. So, and I don't think, from a PR standpoint, I know the leader of the longshoremen came out and said that we will cripple you. I think that's a big turnoff for a lot of people. I know there's a lot of like, there are a lot of people out there like, yeah, strong guy making, these demands. But I think for the most part, it's like, wait, you're going to cripple me? Wait, wait, now I'm thinking about longshoremen, because most people don't even know about longshoremen. I had a good friend who was a longshoreman. He passed away a few years ago. That's all I ever knew about longshoremen. And now I think it's bringing up for a lot of people. It's like, wait a minute, who are these people? Wait, how much do they make? They make a shitload of money. And what are they doing?
Yeah, so I'm with you. Like, I have no problem people wanting to get more money. The problem is when they're trying to slow technological advances, and that makes things more expensive for everyone. I think that's the real problem. And like you said, I mean, I kind of think that automation is inevitable. It's a question of, is it going to happen in 5 years? Is it going to happen in 20 years? But I think at a certain point, the economic deal just becomes so good for automation that it's going to happen. And so I don't know if this is true or not, but it's probably not far off from the truth if it's not true, is that it would actually be cheaper over the long haul for ports to just sort of buy out all the workers, like give them a golden parachute, and then start automating. Wow. So again, I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me if something like that is close to accurate, where they say like, look, we got to start automating now. And like this happens elsewhere in the world, is like these ports are automated. It's not some like insurmountable technological obstacle. And we'll give you like some sort of buyout. And this will enable you to retrain, find different jobs. But in the meantime, we can automate the ports. This is going to drive down costs, make things cheaper for the average American. So that, like I said, it is going to happen at some point. The question is, when?
Well, yeah. Well, even with that, with that buyout, I mean, they're talking about how, a shutdown, could cost like $5 billion a day. If you have, say, 50,000 workers and you give all of them $5 million, as a buyout, you still got a lot of money left over. So, like, oh man, I'm in the wrong business. But Chris Freiman, I want to thank you so much for joining me. Where can people check out your stuff?
You can check me out on Twitter or X at CA Freiman, Freiman. I also do a Substack every now and then. That's probably what most listeners will care about, is the Twitter and the Substack.
Beautiful.